We're going to talk about some fairies, and I'm not talking about the cutesy little sparkly ones. I grew up obsessed with this book, and that has shaped my love for all things weird and wonderful and anything drawn by Brian Froud, basically. Or Wendy Froud, or Ellen Lee, or Arthur Rackham. Yeah, just any of those artists, they understand fairies. I'm talking these fairies. The ones that are gonna steal you away, whisk you under the hill, the ones that'll dip their hats in your blood, haunt old buildings, and just generally skeeve people out. That is the kind of fairy I am talking about today. With a small shout out for this fantastic little art book that I got when I got to meet Brian Froud, and he drew me my own, and I have never been so starstruck in my life over a stupid drawing of a fairy. Anyway, fairies. Let's talk about fairies. I have 7 books to recommend you. The first one is Kingdom of Elfin. So, Kingdom of Elfin is a short story collection of short stories by Sylvia Townsend Warner. Sylvia Townsend Warner is widely believed to be one of the strongest voices in this sort of genre of fantasy, specifically around fairies, which is why there is not only Kingdoms of Elfin, which is a whole anthology dedicated to her fairy stories, but also Of Cats and Elfins, which is a secondary anthology dedicated to her fairy stories. These were most recently published by Handheld Press, which is the publishing company that my mother used to run, which republished old forgotten works by forgotten authors or loved works that were out of print by forgotten authors, usually women. So that is where my copies are from. I love these stories because they all have such a level of whimsy. The more traditional, old-fashioned style of writing really lends itself to this genre of fairy, and the fact that they just don't care. These are fairies that will steal from humans. They don't think of humans as anything other than animals that are there for entertainment or resources. They have their courts and their fun and games and their politics and the various levels of intrigue that you find in the Seelie and Unseelie courts. Fairies here also refers to more sort of goblin-y troll type folk. Those are more often associated with the Unseelie court, but we deal with a lot of like glamorous queen fairies as well as the sort of bumbling fool flavour of fairy. You get a whole range in this anthology. There's a particularly good changeling story which I really enjoyed. There are some really good depictions of sort of English countryside because they all are very much centred around that area of the world. And it's just really comforting. I get the warm and fuzzies when I read that anthology the same way that I do when I read Tolkien. It's that same box in my brain that goes ding when I read them, and I just really love them. If you haven't read any Sylvia Townsend Warner and you really like fairies and that genre, I would give it a go. These are not your romantasy fairies though. Only one of the books on this list could even maybe be called romantasy, so this is very much focusing on the whimsy and the mischief and that flavour, and it's just a really lovely anthology. Next is Under the Earth, Over the Sky by Emily McCosh. This is an indie book that I picked up on a whim because I thought it sounded interesting. I was hoping it was going to be a book that focused on familial relationships rather than romantic ones, because that's something I struggle to find in books these days. And I was so pleasantly impressed. This was a 4.5 star read for me. We follow Iomar, who is the fairy king of his realms, and he discovers a human baby abandoned on the edge of his realm who he decides to adopt, and this baby becomes a changeling, and we follow Iomar as he protects his world from outside forces and a crumbling power under the mountain range inside his kingdom. There is a romantic relationship in this, but it is preconceived and it comes in as just a statement of fact. It's not following them necessarily. It's there in the background. The real main focus is the bond between father and son and the differences between the fairies and the humans. I believe they are called fae in this world, but they feel more like if Tolkien's elves, the sort of elegant, serene kind of elf, bonded a little bit with like the Fraudian mischief-making fairies. It's got really beautiful writing. I don't often love like excessively lyrical writing in my books, but this really hit the mark. I really, really enjoyed it. I just couldn't put it down. I had the ebook and I just had to keep swiping to finish this book, to understand what was going on. It's very low on plot, but the atmosphere and the world building really, really make up for it. And I don't usually hear anyone talking about it. So this is an absolute gem if you like fairies and beautiful world building and lyrical writing and just like immaculate vibes. Next we have Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. This is a novella. I'm also going to combine in the sequel novella, which is Drowned Country, because both deal with fairies and fae in their own way. And I think both are equally as good as each other. There's a gay romance plotline that threads all the way through. There is no burying your gays in this book. We follow Tobias, who is a wild man living in the forest. He has dryads and other naturey forest spirits for company. And one day someone moves back into the manor on the edge of the grounds that he lives on and comes out into the woods and gets himself tangled up in the woods in a way that means Tobias and him have to meet. It is a really sort of oddly practical, whimsical twist on it is kind of a romance. Could this be called romantasy? I wouldn't call it romantasy. It's not romantasy as you would like think about it. The main storyline is a romance plotline, but it's also about respecting nature and the history of the woods and how the trees and the forest came to be what they are today, and the possessiveness of the plants and the trees and the spirits that live there, and Tobias's history and how he came to be there and why he won't leave, and then the effect that this newcomer has, having moved into this house on the edge of the forest, the effect that has on the plants around them, and it's sort of the wildness of Tobias and the sort of prim and proper approach of this newcomer clashing together and the effects of that. I think it's dealt with really, really well. I think the themes are really, really interesting, and it's just a really compelling romance for someone that hates romance. And I really, really love the vibes of the sort of the fairies in the forests. There's lots of dryads and naiads. And then fairies take a bigger role in the second book, but I won't tell you how. The second book is just as good as the first. It really is. Next, we have the Spiderwick Chronicles. I'm recommending you the whole series because they are like this long and they're kids' books, so you can read one in about 20 minutes. These are by Holly Black and Nicholas Ditterlizzi. This was crack to me as a kid. I reread this series so many times. I bought the field guide, which I think you might be able to see at the top shelf up there. And I was obsessed because of the illustrations, because of the story where this single mother and her 3 children move into their estranged aunt's old house while she's in a nursing home, and they uncover a secret room with a secret guidebook all about fairies in the attic. And they start discovering these fairies all around the house and in the house, some of them. And it's about sort of protecting their turf and not disturbing the balance and making sure that they are able to live how they want to live in this house and make the life that they need to without disturbing anything. And it's about learning about their history and their family and their ancestors and their history with the house and how things came to be and their relationships with the fairies. And it's just so intricate. I think this was the first piece of fiction where the world building really caught me because like they've put so much thought into these fairies and how they adapt to their surroundings and how they live and how they breed and how they camouflage into the world and where you would find them and where you wouldn't. And it's just fantastic. I really, really fell in love with it. It was the first series that I remember reading where I realised you could do that. You could just make up your own world in that much detail. Like you were allowed to do that. And that is where like the little spark of my brain went, haha, I can do that too. And I started writing and toying with fantastical things that my brain came up with. And that series has such a huge place in my reading journey. There was also a follow-up series, which I only got my hands on much later on in life, because I think it came out much later after I'd read the original series, which I don't love as much, but I think does have some improvements over the initial series for readers of this generation. The films, I've only seen the one with Freddie Highmore in it, who plays the twins. I've not seen the new show because it was only shown on like American streaming services, which really upset me because I would love to see it. I really, really loved that series. Then I have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is the only one that I would consider a romantasy on this list. This follows Theodora Ettings, who has been cursed by a fairy by stealing half of her soul. This this means that she doesn't feel certain emotions, she doesn't have the same hesitations or prejudices or inhibitions that a regular person might have. And she has been forced to live with her aunt and her cousin because no one else knows what to do with her. And she is now doing her best to help her cousin find a husband in London's season and stay out of the way and not cause too much mischief. It's really interesting to see how Olivia Atwater manages the fact that she does have some emotions and doesn't have others. Like, she doesn't have shame, but she is curious, but she is also aware when she's screwed up. She just kind of doesn't care, but is sort of aware that, oh, her aunt's gonna like give her hell for what she just did. And I really enjoyed the very autistic coded elements of her personality that way. She runs into the Grand Sorcier? I hate pronouncing French words in English. The grumpy old man who's in charge of magic. He's not old. The grumpy man who's in charge of magic in London and is like the most powerful mage ever. Of course, she bumps into him in an old shop, and one thing leads to another, and they keep bumping into each other over in London while Theodora's cousin is trying to find a husband and get married. There is another B plot where children are going missing, and then this man is trying to work out why they're going missing, how they're going missing, and what's happening to these children. And it seems to be the only thing that will break his icy exterior until he meets Theodora, pretty much. It's a really lovely, really short book. I love historical mysteries, and there's very much a heavy element of that, as well as the fairy element, where some of the fairies are famous, they have names, they are infamous among society because they innately have magic, whereas not all humans do. I think it's a really interesting setup. I actually didn't hate the romance. To people that don't like romance, I would recommend this if you actually wanted to give it a go, because I thought it was really well done. I didn't think it was particularly like soppy or predictable in a bad way. And it was very Howl's Moving Castle kind of vibes. It was that sort of like grumpy and then doesn't give a shit combination, which maybe that's what I want in my romance. I want a grumpy person and someone who just doesn't care. Maybe that's the trick. But yeah, love this book. Hugely recommend. Next we have Ink and Sigil by Kevin Hearn. This is about Al McBarish, who is a Glaswegian sigillist, which means he has the special pens and the special inks to craft sigils on fairy contracts. So he does a lot of dealings with the fae. This is a supernatural contemporary story. It is a fantasy mystery. It's not historical, sadly, otherwise that would be a triple whammy. And we follow Al in the wake of his apprentice dying, which is bad, but is worse because this is not the first apprentice of his that has died. It's like the third or the fourth or even the fifth. There's been a few. And we start with him at the crime scene where this poor apprentice has been murdered in very suspicious circumstances, and he uncovers my favourite goblin character ever, a pink hobgoblin who names himself Buck Foy, which is also my favourite example of a spoonerism in a book. Al and Buck then launch into this mystery about why the apprentices are going missing and then dying, and what does it have to do with the fair folk. And they fall into this plot. I really loved the way that Kevin Hearn entwines mythology and Scottish mythology into Glasgow, modern day Glasgow. The fact that you have certain bars where you can go and there's like a fairy bartender and they can use a portal to portal in and out of the fairy world. The fact that Al is on quite good terms with the Seelie Queen. The fact that there are goblins and ghouls and redcaps all over the place. And there's like famous monsters that are lodged in certain places, so you don't go there and you have to ward away humans from going from those places. I really, really, really enjoyed the world building in this. I thought it was really funny. I also really enjoyed Al's communication, because Al has a curse on him. He is cursed so that anyone he speaks to or something along those lines, or speaks to for too long, or like something like that, dies basically, or becomes cursed themselves. So what he does is he never uses his voice. He talks through a text-to-speech app. He has, he writes what he wants to say, but he doesn't speak verbally to most people because he values their life, funnily enough. But I thought it was a really interesting dynamic. I thought that was a really interesting source of conflict for this novel, which has enough like teeth as it is with all these fairies floating about. There are some fantastic side characters. There's some great Scots slang in there. This is a spin-off of the Iron Druid series, which I have not read, but it does contain spoilers for that. So if you are reading that or plan on reading it, this is a spin-off series, and I think the author Kevin Hearn insists that you can read them separately, but having not read the Iron Druid series, I definitely didn't pick up on a couple of things. There are a couple of things that just did not make sense to me because I hadn't read that series. So it's not a perfect separation, but it is a really interesting one, and I would really recommend this. Unfortunately, I hated the sequel, so I've not read past the sequel, but I loved the first one. Next we have Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This took me by surprise because I first read Uprooted by her and I hated it. I thought it was so boring. But Spinning Silver is fucking fantastic. If you like fairy tales, if you like Eastern European mythology and just like settings as a fantasy setting, this is for you. We lean heavily on fairy tales and the rules of fairy tales. And although we're not set in like a fairy tale world, they very much come into the real world. We follow Miriam, who has taken it upon herself to pay off her father's debts because he's a useless lump, and she gains the ability to turn silver into gold. This catches the attention of a local fairy who then comes into her life and shit gets weird. We follow the tropes of like 3 very different women in their own stories that all get intertwined because of the overarching plot. And Miriam is smart. She doesn't take any nonsense. She is calm about these ridiculous situations that she gets pulled into because of the fairies and the way that fairylands work. And the rules that she has to follow. We've got magic mirrors, we go into the city, and there's a lot of like Jewish culture and Jewish mythology entwined into it as well, which I thought was really cool as well, because that's not something I know a lot about, and this was a really good medium to learn about it. Yeah, if any of those things appeal, I really recommend you read it. It's one of those books that just keeps giving, and there's not quite another one like it, really. Next we have Among Others by Jo Walton. This is an epistolary novel told in diary entries of a girl who has become disabled because of a car accident that she and her twin were in that killed her twin and hurt her leg badly enough that she needs to use crutches, all because their mother is a dark witch. This book, the plot is so twisty and windy. I struggle to know where to start to explain it because I think the blurb on the back of the book tells you too much. We are in, I want to say like the 80s or 90s. Our main character, Moore, is sent to live with her uncle because she hands herself into the foster system. Her uncle then sends her to boarding school, so we spend a lot of time in boarding school. But the way that the fairies come in is that because her home life was so magical, her mother was a dark witch and not particularly nice, but her grandmother, who she lived with for a bit after that, lived in an area where there were fairies, and some of them are named after Tolkien's fairies because Moore is a big reader, so she references loads of books within this story because she's just a teenage girl writing in her diary. And it's really interesting to see the way that they're talked about, because they're talked about as just fact, because she can see them, she can interact with them. Her and her twin used to hang out with them, and it's a story about her and her recovery and rebuilding her life in the wake of this accident, basically. And there aren't loads of fairies in this story, but they have got teeth, they are dangerous, and they do the acts of magic you might expect from fairies without giving too much away. But this one's more like a light-hearted. It's not light-hearted. It's lighter on the fairies, but I think the way that they are portrayed very much lands them firmly in this recommendations list. Yes, I don't agree with a turn that the plot takes towards the end. I think it ruins it a little bit. But the rest of the book is really good, and at no point did I ever doubt the fact that we were reading the diaries of a teenage girl. And lastly, we have Hobbity Dick. This was the first book that I read this year about a hobgoblin that lives in a household, in a puritanical household, and a new family moves in to this house who do not believe in hobgoblins or fairies, but Hobbity Dick is there. And he's going to make their lives miserable until they work out that he is there and they respect him as they should. And it's full of mischief, it's full of giggles, it's full of frustration as sort of the historical element, which is really interesting. And then there are some bits where we go off out of the house and find other fairies and their own territories. And I really liked the way that the fairies are described as having their own territories, and they won't touch you unless you encroach on their turf, which seems reasonable to me, except they don't tell people where their territory boundaries are. So it's another book full of mischief. It's quite an old book now, and I found it completely by accident, and I ended up really, really loving it. It's a short read, and I think more people should read it because mischievous hobgoblins are like such a great idea for a protagonist because they're just agents of chaos and you can get so much conflict out of them, and it makes things really interesting because he will take a liking to some people and he will not to others and decide he's their worst enemy, and it's just really brilliant, and I really, really enjoyed the story, and I think more people should read it. But that was it. That was my list of recommendations for scary fairy books or mischievous fairies or whimsical fairies, but not your sort of typical fae, romantasy fae. Do you have any other recommendations for books with fairies like this? I have definitely missed some, but they're my favourite type of fairy to read about. I don't particularly enjoy reading about the romantasy ones, so this is my go-to. So please do leave any recommendations down below. If you made it this far, leave me a fairy emoji. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff if you have the inclination to do so. It really helps me out. And I will see you in the next video.